welcome everyone to our February coffee chat. We'll be discussing from plant orders to plant accessions. My name is Laura Knutson Murray. I am the GIS coordinator and community outreach assistant for IrisBG. And with us today is Shanna Jones. She's also an outreach assistant for IrisBG. The recording, the presentation, and other materials will be made available in our knowledge library. All of our previous coffee chats can be found there under the category Articles and Presentations. You can also follow the coffee chat topic and be notified via email anytime something is posted. The idea with these sessions is that we at IrisBG would like to offer you a space where you can connect with your peers, chat about issues that come up with your work with your collections. We don't have a fixed format for these, so please get in touch with me if you would like to present a challenge on a topic. It can be anything, big or small. And hopefully you will make some new connections today, and together we may become a little bit wiser. This is a map of all the institutions represented today to learn a little bit more about who's here and have a poll. What is your level of expertise with using IrisBG? Are you a novice, intermediate, advanced user, or just trying out the trial version? Looks like about 70% of you are intermediate users. I have a couple more polls before we get into our discussion, just to get us all thinking about accessions. What's the average number of new accessions that you add per year? Less than 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, or more than 5,000? 70% of you are accessioning less than 1,000 items a year. And then also, are you using the data import template? 70% of you are not using the import template, so perhaps we will learn something new today. Our presenters today are Shanna Jones. She is the plant collections manager at Cheekwood Estate and Gardens in Nashville, and Jaime Fry, the curator of living collections at Newfields. We'll have two presenters today. I will turn the controls over to Shanna.
All right then. Thanks everyone for coming to the coffee chat today. So yes, I am here speaking on behalf of Cheekwood today. One of the biggest projects I was involved in at Cheekwood occurred shortly after I was hired on. And so I was still pretty green, also working on, working with a newly hired vice president of horticulture and director of horticulture. And in a huge installation such as this, there were so many moving parts besides the plants, but just with the plant selection alone and sourcing itself, there were quite a few people involved. So my goal for this coffee chat is to show, my portion of the coffee chat is to show a moment in time when things seemed like they could have been better organized. And it's just sort of my way of facilitating the discussion later on, hopefully sparking some ideas or similarities in your own work in dealing with large plant orders. So yeah, this is a photograph of the children's garden at Cheekwood, and this is the living library portion. It's a beautiful space. It's an extraordinary space, and it's amazing that it all came together. So it's about 2 acres, and there are themed sections. There's the Hungry Hedgerow, Tennessee Woodland Walk, a rain garden, nature's library, a little woods, a turtle creek, it's a turtle sanctuary, a lily pool, and a sensory walk. 8,542 plants were accessioned just for this garden alone in 2019, which is when ground broke in 2019 in a mostly wooded section of Cheekwood to make way for this very special garden. It's very fancy children's garden, and if anyone's ever visited, I think that's probably what would come to mind. So the people involved, we had the landscape designer, a landscape architecture firm, a garden installation crew, of course, and we even had this nurseryman hired to source plants. And then there was also the VP of horticulture, the director of horticulture, and me. So the landscape designer and I worked together on plant selection to carefully choose species and cultivars that would fulfill our collecting mission. And then he went on to create these absolutely beautiful designs with, using those plants. The landscape architecture firm was, responsible for overseeing the design and construction of the many hardscapes. There's buildings, fountains, and other structures within the garden. The nurseryman owns a wholesale nursery. So it's already within his job to source plants for his own business. So Cheekwood has a close relationship with him. So it's a local business, and you know how politics can go. So we decided to involve him with the project. The VP was the overall project manager, and the director of horticulture was responsible for overseeing a lot of the contractors and the purchasing of the plants. So there were also other folks involved too, like, the arborist who provided tree protection for the existing trees, and the electricians, so forth and so on. But these were the people that were involved directly with the plants. Oh, and there's our CEO. So she's amazing. I have a lot of respect for our CEO, and she's very hands-on with everything that goes on at Cheekwood. And she was very involved with the children's garden, from the building of the studio pavilion to the plants. And so, after a lot of the plants were installed, she had some concerns that some plants may be toxic. And so this is just one of those things that, you don't expect to happen, but lo and behold, we had to dig up a lot of the plant material and move it away from the hungry hands of children, So yeah, substitutions happen too, even a lot of times without warning, plants showed up to the property, in lieu of other plants because they couldn't find the exact cultivars we were looking for. So other reasons that locations of plants changed during the process were the location of some of the structures were amended. So that affected the garden bed, like square footage. And so wouldn't fit all the plants that were originally designed for those particular beds. And, there's just mistakes by the landscaping crew that was hired to plant the all of the items. So yeah, this is one of the documents. This is one of the 10 planting designs that I worked with just to, in order to accession the plants in their correct locations. And so I don't know if you can tell from your screen, but this was very densely planted, and there were 10 of these sections. So yeah, the next few slides are just showing the different documents that I was cross-referencing. And this is that same section on the left, which is it's finished. And this is where the turtles are located in this section. This was a plant list that came from our landscape designer. So we had this going for us. And then this is another spreadsheet that our VP created. And you can see over here for Cheekwood use only, there's like a column for pictures submitted and approval. And that is referring to this. That was coming from our nursery contractor, our nurseryman contractor, who was out sourcing plants, and he would send us these pictures via Word documents. And then this is our landscape designer comments that this blueberry was approved. And then this rhododendron viscosum, you can see here that our designer said it's a little poor in form, but we'll accept it. And I will be real honest with you, these did die after we put them in the ground. That was my experience, you're just using all of these different things. And then in just a few months later, another project, the Japanese garden renovation, was a much smaller project and much easier to oversee. And with that, I actually began using this data import template for IrisBG. And I even shared this with, we did have someone else, not the same person, but we did have someone else we were working with to source plants. And she was very happy to oblige to use this and keeping track with everything. And then, and just a year later, a much smaller project, a literary garden renovation. So this was only just about 4,000 plants. And this is the first project that we began sourcing the plants ourselves, much easier to keep track of everything. And it gave us a lot more control of the plant material as well. And yeah, that's that's all. I just wanted to kind of go over my journey with, big plant orders and how I have, I'm still working on it, but how I've come to start dealing with it. I think as plant recorders, we all have varying degrees of responsibility and even time, and these large orders can be completely overwhelming. So I'm really interested to see how others, what workflows and everyone else is using and dealing with them. So yeah, and now Jamie's gonna show us a thing or two about a thing or two. So thanks, everyone.
Cool. Okay, so hi friends, I'm Jaime Fry. I'm the Assistant Curator of Living Collections at Newfields in Indianapolis, Indiana. I feel like quite a few of you know me, have heard me talk about various things in these coffee chats. For those of you who aren't familiar with Newfields, we're a 152-acre cultural campus in central Indiana. So we have a 100-acre art and nature park, 50 acres of gardens, including a 26-acre historic home and estate, as well as a 4-floor encyclopedic art museum, just for giggles and hee-haws. So we have a lot of things going on, and we never had a plant records person until I showed up in 2014 and started telling my boss that we needed one and harassed him until he hired me. So I took over the mantle of, we had a very old Access database from the 1980s that had largely been used as an ordering database and then never really followed up on. So I'm still working through, to this day, culling a lot of old data and trying to clean up a lot of things that were just never sort of center of mind. We have a relatively small staff now. I would say a mid-sized staff, but a lot of times it's trying to make sure that plants stay alive and thrive, and not so much worried about what's in our databases. And that's what we're here for. So we got Iris a few years ago, and I've been so thrilled to have a real database again. So one of the things that I really enjoy and appreciate using with Iris is the batch accessioning process. So like I mentioned, we're a big institution. Our budget is done project-based. So we have budgets for things, garden spaces that are endowed. We have general operating plant budget, which is all of our summer annuals and just general added perennials and woodies. Plus we have all of these project budgets, which are things like garden renovations, garden restorations, capital projects, things like that. We have 7 and now actually 8 since I made this PowerPoint yesterday. We've added somebody. So we have 7 or 8 designing horticulturists. So they all maintain a handful of areas and they source and design plants for those areas. We have about 25 garden areas total. And we have been doing a ton of renovations recently. There's been a massive influx of plant material for these garden renovations. So some of those renovations really started kicking off in 2019, just before the pandemic hit. So we created a large grass parking area that has a structured element that the grass grows through for overflow parking. And of course, this needed plants to sort of define those spaces, define where the parking spaces started and stopped, because when it's just a grass field, it's very hard to know when you just have mud underneath you versus when you have the structural grid underneath you. We renovated our beer garden terrace, so we added a whole extra building near one of our historic buildings on campus for our culinary team to be sort of based out of. We have a lovely beer garden. They serve all sorts of delightful alcoholic, non-alcoholic, and tasty treats. Our orchard, which is the background sort of hero image of this presentation, we have a small historic orchard. It was never really used for production, even at the time of the estate. We always had fruit in it, but it was never really heavily produced. And because we have an upcoming project to remove an entire parking lot and put a cut flower and vegetable garden in it, the small plot that was in our orchard really wasn't needed anymore. So Patty sort of took that space and made this really beautiful, dreamy, designed meadow out of it. So that was a huge planting. And then we have 2 border gardens on either side of a formal alley of red oak. And both of those border gardens got completely renovated back to back. And then we have that new cut flower and veg garden coming up. So lots of construction means lots of plants. So not even including our regular added accessions from tweaking perennials, adding or replacing woodies, etc. We're looking at about 40,000 additional plants in the last 4 years alone. So it's a lot of plant material to sort through as it comes in. The way that we handle it here is I wear a lot of hats, and that actually includes being the ordering and money person on top of doing the plant records, and it actually kind of works out for me. So in December, all the horticulturists basically take a blank version of our order spreadsheet, and they get their orders into me for the next spring and summer. So our sort of bulb stuff is a similar process, different timeline. This is like the big bulk meat of it. So this is our perennials, our woodies, and all of our summer seasonal display stuff. I usually try to get all of the wholesale stuff out. So anybody we have a rep for, anybody that's bringing us a whole truck of plants, I try to get those out before the holidays. It sort of gives us some time to have the vendors get it and sort of process it. Some of them are super quick and responsive, and I get responses back from them in before I leave for my holiday vacation. Some of them I never get paperwork for. I'm still waiting for paperwork from one of our problem children, and they're delivering our spring stuff in like 3 weeks. So it just depends on the vendor, and we try to know that things change and things are different. So in January and February, the time frame we're in now is when I'm dealing with a lot of substitutions and changes. I'm going through confirmation paperwork, making sure we have all of our ducks in a row. We know who's coming when, and what we're supposed to be getting. This is when vendors are coming back to me and saying, sorry, I told you you could have that, but I didn't get it from my person. So let's do a little pivot. And so then I basically play middleman between all of our designing hort staff and our vendors. And it seems to work pretty well because I can make changes in the ordering spreadsheet to sort of reflect that ebb and flow, reflect what's been canceled, what we substituted with. So we have all of those notes when the trucks actually arrive in April, and things get a little crazy. So yeah, April is when we start getting plants in earnest, usually starting with the perennials and then trailing into May with our annuals. We order from about 50 plus vendors in any given season. So it's a lot between mail order and wholesale. We have a lot coming in. And I never do any of my accessioning until plants are actually here, because we always know that things go haywire in the process. I never count on something actually coming in until it is here and I have seen it. And that is something that I have sort of been working through in the last couple of years, is the I have seen it part. Because there is nothing like actually seeing the plants and knowing that the paperwork does match reality. And then from there, I go through the accessioning and labeling process. I try to do it as quickly as possible. It doesn't always happen as fast as I would like it to, which is where that batch processing usually comes in place and helps. Because by the time that I'm ready to sit down and actually do all that paperwork, I have almost all of the plans in, and I can do almost all of my accessioning in one fell swoop. So I have a really beefy order spreadsheet, which I'm going to show you a screenshot of in a second, but that ordering spreadsheet looks real small on the screen because there's a lot of information. So I just wanted to sort of go over some of the important bits and pieces of it. So when the horticulturists put their orders in, I have them use whatever name the vendor is using. However, it's going to show up on the vendor's paperwork. That's how I want it, because that's how I'm going to cross-check invoices. So I cross-check everything from the back end once I get the paperwork in. And it's a lot easier if it all sorts out to the same way it shows up on the invoice. I include plant type because this sort of helps me know. In this category, I have things like herbaceous annual or herbaceous perennial. Same thing, sometimes we use woody plants in seasonal displays. So I'll ask if it's a shrub annual. I'll know that, hey, this is sort of a temporary thing. I should still accession it because it's probably going to find a home somewhere else, but also know that you're probably going to have to track down where it ended up at the end of the season, because she's not staying in that pot or that display bed or wherever. She's going somewhere else, whether that somewhere else is someone's house or a nook and cranny somewhere in the garden. That has yet to be determined. So that sort of helps me know that I need to follow up on stuff. We use intended locations. Again, I like to know which gardens the horticulturists think they're going to put that perennial in. I know that doesn't always match reality, but it gives a nice sort of landing place and place to start in the database, where I don't have to go through and then change everything from storage nursery, which is sort of our blank storage code, into another garden space. I can sort of say, hey, it was intended for here, and then shuffle those few tweaks around as I need to. Then there's all the normal things that you would see in an order spreadsheet: sizes, quantities, all that good stuff. I do use desired delivery season because sometimes things get a little funky with do they want it for spring, so that's March, spring, or do they want it for spring, summer, which is May for the summer season. Also, for my purposes, to keep everything sort of in check and balance, I do make sure that the budget accounts are there, so I know when I'm doing invoices what needs to be coded to what. That is a whole nother shindig, as well as the PO numbers as I start to make those. Real crucial though, which I love, are the ordered, confirmed, and arrived columns. So those are what I use to very heavily sort my data. So as I go through and I submit things to vendors, I will put yeses in the ordered columns. When I get confirmation back from them that yes, we should be getting those plants, I will put yeses in those columns. And then same thing when they arrive. And it just helps me go through, especially this time of year, and say, okay, cool, what hasn't been confirmed? Like, who am I still waiting to hear back from? Like, which plants are sort of in peril of us not getting? Like, who do I need to start chasing down for information? And that helps me out so much. So this is that really overwhelming spreadsheet. You can see it's got a whole bunch of all those columns, but they're all sortable, which really helps. That way, when we've got a random delphinium sitting out in the nursery, just like languishing, and I don't know whose it is, I can easily just go to the order spreadsheet, type in delphinium, and it'll show me all of the delphiniums and whose they're supposed to be. For budgeting purposes, I also have like a little tracker up in the left-hand corner, so I know how much money we've spent and how much we have left. So when my boss comes to me and is like, hey, how are we doing on the budget? I usually have a pretty quick answer. And then this is usually what my invoices look like. So this is an actual North Creek invoice from when we were doing the orchard renovation. So I go through and after or as I do my big batch updates, I will go ahead and I will just type in the accession numbers next to the line of that plant on the actual invoice. It helps me if I ever have a question for the paperwork later. I store all of the invoices in accession order in a file on my computer or in a folder on my computer. And it basically, that just replaced the big honkin' binders I used to keep that had all of the printed accession paperwork. I've tried to move more digital, and I will just print all of these double-sided, just sort of to keep a paper copy in case our server room ever like explodes one day or something along those lines, but generally trying to use less paper. And then I also sort of use which coding and which POs the different plants were to help from that side of things. So again, more work doing the billing for the plants, but the work really sort of like goes hand in hand and ties in together. And then I translate that beautiful order spreadsheet into that data input spreadsheet. So I sort of tweaked it for my own uses based on the way that I accession things. I'm not going to read you all the fields that I use. But basically, you know, I tailored it to specifically the fields that I use the most and the fields that correspond with that ordering spreadsheet. So again, big honking spreadsheet, but it is super, super helpful to be able to sort of see all of my data together. And I tend to find that I see more mistakes that way when I've got whole swaths of data that are either similar or from similar places. And it allows me to sort of review and see all of that data before it goes into Iris. So this is an example of some of the accession sheets and how I use it. So again, this is from that same invoice. But basically, I always bring my stuff in as not determined. Basically, for me, the nursery said it was this. Nobody, at least I didn't, nobody else actually sat there and was like, yes, I'm going to key this out and like, you know, bring up the recent Mount Cuba publication on Carex and make sure it's the right one. Like, that is my note that basically I'm trusting what the nursery told me, and we're going to go with that. And that can always change. Sometimes it does. For the origin reference, I always use the invoice number. That way, if we ever have to go back on something with the vendor, I have a really quick reference as to what their sort of number referring to that plant would be in terms of our purchase. And then I actually have recently switched to using our reference number as the PO number, so I can do the same thing in there. I heavily use the attributes, so I will very, very heavily key attributes with projects. So for example, I can pull a really good, really easy list of all the plants we put in during the span of the orchard renovation project in reports, just from that attribute field without having to tinker with anything else. And I have found that to be super, super helpful in my work accessioning. But yeah, basically it's just sort of normal from there. The other thing that I've really loved using is the references pane and using the reference files. So I will put that invoice in that reference so that I can pull it up straight from Iris if I have to. It's magical. It's wonderful. And really that batch ordering process has just helped sort of maintain some order to the chaos of making a garden space go from this to something like this. So that is the new orchard. Patty did a beautiful job with it. That was last fall. And yeah, so that's sort of my big, scary, crazy process.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Jamie and Shanna, for showing us what you have going on. And I would encourage all of us to share what you have going on. We're all doing such interesting, great work. So feel free to volunteer to host a topic. And I hope to see you next month at the BGCI presentation. We'll be hearing from John Lufgren from Uppsala in Sweden. It'll be a good presentation. Until next time.